It's Friday night, and people are off work and out of school. Millennials are looking for things to do. Perfect time for a game night with friends. But what type of games? The understood dominance of video games would suggest sitting in front of a screen. But that trend is changing. Millennials are starting to turn their attention to board games. We'll play with the issue on this edition of Equal Time. The popularity of board games among millennials is on the rise. The board game trend is impacting players and distributors of the games. George Tanner has that story.
Millennials are starting to transition from pushing buttons on a video game controller to rolling dice instead. Edward Leto owns Ronin Games and Hobbies in Castro Valley. He's witnessing a rise in popularity of board games.
We do board game night every Saturday night. I notice actually a lot of 20-something couples come in and hang out and play board games.
Leto says he's more board games out for sale than he did back in the 90s. The trend is affecting video game retailers as well.
I definitely ring up a lot more parents or older people that are still playing games like on the PS3 or on the new generations. So the segue is happening with the new generation of kids coming in and parents buying games for their kids and buying new consoles.
GameStop is selling board games as well, classical games with a nerdy twist. One example of a game in stock is the Legend of Zelda Monopoly game.
I've actually pre-ordered a Pokemon Monopoly board game, and I'm super excited for it.
But not everyone agrees the sales numbers tell the whole story. Angelica Cabanlit is the president of the Game Dev Club at San Jose State University, which meets here in the library. The club aims to give students the tools to develop their own digital games. Cabanlit acknowledges that video game sales are going down, while board game sales are going up. And suddenly, it seems board games are cool.
As much as there's an indie scene of video games, there's now an indie scene of board games. So now with the indie scene of board games, more people are getting involved in the development of board games.
Indie game developers sometimes use crowdfunding websites to fund their games. Kickstarter is one such site. The platform raised $52.1 million in 2013 in investments towards board games. That is roughly 15% more than video game developers received in the same period. But video games on mobile phones are more popular than ever, according to Jesse Taylor.
Go and ask somebody in the mobile games industry and they'll tell you it's booming and there's tremendous growth.
Will the future video games be on mobile phones?
When we come back, we will dig deeper into this trend. The big question is, why are board games becoming more popular among millennials? And what are board games doing to combat the video game market? George Tanner picks up our story.
Millennials are returning to board games for many possible reasons.
Nostalgia for me is cyclical, so that every few years there's a kind of desire for the old. And you can see that in fashion. For example, nowadays fashion, you see, 80s styles, 90s styles.
Other game professionals feel that entertainment is constantly evolving.
I think we've come almost full circle at this point where board games are a novel entertainment form in and of themselves.
The amount of screen time millennials face for school and work is what is driving the nostalgia factor.
I like to play board games because it's a great way to pass time. Also for the family aspect of it.
When my friends come over, I think it's a great way to have everyone, socialize and, have fun and get a little crazy and, not worry about having to switch controllers or waiting for someone to die in the game or something. We can all be a part of the game and socialize and have a great time.
But the nostalgia does not necessarily mean millennials want the same games from their childhood.
As an instructor at a university and a community college, I find that students are often anticipating the next thing they're going to do as a way to distract them from what they're doing at that one moment.
A more popular type of game is European board games. They have more options in their play than classic games and involve interacting with other players throughout the entire game. Little argues these types of board games are borrowing from the video game model.
Nowadays, much like video games that keep offering downloadable content to change the game, many games offer expansions now to actually improve the game.
Little's store sells many European board games. Some of them have expansion packs to keep them alive.
Even the old classics like Settlers of Catan is a staple game. It's been out for 40 years, and it's still one of my #1 sellers.
Little says board games score big with players when they're customizable, have expansion packs, and allow players to create house rules. Another way board games are borrowing from the video game model is by embracing dark and mature themes. Betrayal in House on the Hill involves exploring a haunted house. Dead of Winter is a zombie survival game.
In terms of the attraction to more adult themes, I think that there's kind of an incorporation process in which more subterranean cultural genres that we can describe as adult themes get sort of integrated into the mainstream little by little.
Video games are borrowing from the board game model as well.
I'm seeing concepts from modern board games, the newest of the new board games, which are much more story-driven, much more almost invent your own fiction, and that's feeding back into video games as well.
Creating a video game doesn't always involve a computer. The Game Dev Club at SJSU meets once a week to prototype concepts for digital games. Paper is cut. Pen and pencil label items and write rules on note cards. And maps are drawn.
This is done so that, first of all, no one will have to code an actual map. You can just get it done in like 10 seconds. It's really fast.
Although board games are enjoying a resurgence, will they ultimately win over video?
Board games and video games are more of a balancing act between the two types of gaming and not really one or the other, right? But there's definitely this interplay.
When we come back, a panel of millennials and a sociologist will discuss their thoughts on the board game trend. Welcome back to what should be a fun edition of this discussion in equal time today. Our focus is on game night, the video versus board games. Let's meet our guests.
Hi, I'm Winston Gregory. I'm a third-year animation illustration student, and I'm an avid video gamer.
Hi, I'm JoMarie Almendra. I'm a fourth-year radio, television, film major, and on my free time I like to play PC games and console gaming.
Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Nava. I'm a sociology professor here at San Jose State University, and I teach a media course.
Hi, my name is Angelica Cabanlit. I am the president of the SJSU Game Dev Club.
Hi, my name is George Tanner. I'm the correspondent for this story.
I like the idea that you all are here because you're going to help educate the host of the show. Because quite frankly, I only grew up during a time when there were no video games, and we played, board games all the time, and it was fun, it was stimulating. And I think it was good for the mind, it excited the mind, critical thinking possibilities, you learned how to use money. Then video games came along when I started out in the world, but now they've become the most popular thing. So I'm hearing millennials are going back to board games. What's up with that?
I think it's really, in part, like video games. They're making board games more popular, but the board games are actually changing, right, George?
Yes.
What if?
So the games like Monopoly, they're getting very little sales increase, but the European style games are getting a larger increase. And the European style games, they're more complicated. Like they force you to pay attention during the whole game, which is something that you don't get for a board game necessarily. Like for Monopoly, for example, yes, you need to pay attention to where if they land on your space or whatever, but for the large part, you kind of zone out between your turns.
Maybe that's the difference between our generation, because I've had friends in college who played Monopoly and went on to be business tycoons. So don't zone out. You might get something out of it. But even if you don't, I'm kind of surprised, Doctor, that board games are now taking over the interests of millennials. Why?
Yeah, I would say that there's a perhaps the opposition between video games and board games is probably the wrong thing. And maybe there's something happening where, because of our kind of time compression, reorganization of labor, we're constantly busy. Perhaps that is affecting our concentration as generations, right? The new generation, and perhaps the board games are taking cues from video games in terms of how to capture your attention, in a sense. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but is it a trend? Can we honestly say that that's happening now more and more, or is it isolated?
Well, the trend is clear because you can see the numbers growing in terms of the numbers of people buying board games. So the people that are producing them are making lots of money from that. Maybe the marketing's getting better. They're knowing what the millennials like, and they don't like to wait for their turn, like George said. You know what I'm saying? I'm not in a negative way, but you get kind of distracted when you're in the middle of a game. You know, when the other person's going, and then you're waiting, and then you're going to grab a bag of chips or something and go to the corner. You know.
I just want to say that we live in a generation now where technology is everywhere around us. We millennials we're blessed with all these technology. That's why you see a lot of Let's Play videos online on YouTube, or Let's Play board games, Geek and Sundry, Tabletop, are just some of the examples of people talking about board games. We have to understand that the underlying mechanic and factors of what makes board games and video games, there's underlying mechanics. There's just there's dressing, narratives, stories that are put on top of it, on top of all the technology that we're given. But the underlying mechanics are what transposes throughout the generations.
And do you understand exactly what she meant by that? JoMarie?
Well, not entirely, but personally, I don't really play a lot of board games. Like, it was a surprise to me knowing that that board games are having a rise in sales, because usually I just see people playing more like PC games or like console gaming, and I feel like, yeah, it kind of surprised me because millennials usually like to do things on their own. Like, we have our phones and we're always just like in our, our faces are down in our phones. So, and PC gaming and console gaming is like a really solitary experience, at least for me, because usually I don't like playing with other people because I play it more for like the story and the narrative, and that's what gets me, I think. So
doesn't that concern you, though? I mean, I have no disrespect when I say this, but doesn't it concern you that your generation is becoming more internal as opposed to external and inclusive? Why aren't you communicating more? Put all of the games down and just interact with each other.
We're communicating in different ways. Because like I said, we are blessed with all the technology and all these different resources out there. We're communicating differently through games. Not just face-to-face interactions as what board games provide, but through that interpersonal, interconnectivity, internet space. And that's what we're doing now. We're just seeing the communication transpose from what was normal, like, talking like you and me here, to an interconnected world like the internet.
But I think the Bay Area audience that's watching us right now is going to say, that's great for now in this time in your life, but 20, 30 years from now, when you are running this country, running this valley, you're the leaders, that's not going to work.
Yeah, that does concern me. I think I have seen that. I have seen people that actually struggle, have a lot of social anxiety because they're so used to being so internal, just so to themselves, that and it's really driven them to insane points where I've seen them become really depressed. They feel really deprived, and they just don't leave their rooms. They don't leave their computers. So I think it really is a big problem, honestly. And I mean, we also we're so connected now with like Facebook. You could just see all your friends online. You could chat with people, and I actually got off Facebook personally for personal reasons. I think that I like having that face-to-face interaction. Like I'm starting to get used to it. Back in high school, I had a lot of social anxiety, like approaching people, and I've been trying to get over that by getting away from technology, because that's kind of where it's such an advancement, like all this connection, but it's also
Stress.
It's also very stressful.
Yeah,
like
it's
I've
fun.
heard like Facebook can call it like depressions, but I think we should go back to like board games and stuff. This is a little bit of a tangent, but and then video games, they are very like interactive and stuff too, but they could also be very isolating. Like
Go ahead, you want to say?
Yeah, like I can see why that is, because I notice like now video games are becoming way more cinematic. Like it's like you're in a movie. Like especially with games like the Walking Dead game series or the Wolf Among Us series, where basically like these games you get to choose the decisions that the characters make. So I feel like in some ways maybe there's some people who can pretend they are the actual character, and things can get a little messy in that way. But for me, like, no, I'm not gonna think I'm the actual character, but I just feel like it's way more immersive, and I kind of get lost in it.
And that's what I think that's the concern some people might have.
Yeah.
It's okay for entertainment, it's okay to do this, there's nothing wrong with it, but do we go too far with it, and do we miss out on the world around us as a result? What would you say about that?
I'd say that, you know, all these forms of entertainment that get us kind of into this individualistic mode, or we kind of cut people off in our lives and we kind of get immersed. Sometimes people obsessively get into the Facebook and then they start looking at different people's lives, and then it makes them feel if their other people's lives look better than theirs, you know, they're going to feel a little bit, you know, their self-esteem might fall a little bit. So what board games can do for people is give them a place where they can actually have a direct interaction that makes you feel good about yourself. You get to express yourself, and you might actually get to win, you know, which is hard in life these days, right? You know, the economy's tough. You know?
But tapping into that competitive spirit, I want to win this game, I want to do that. That was a part of the learning experience of a board game. Do you get that from video?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I think there's definitely moments in games where you're like, yes, you know. I grew up with, like you're saying, your generation, you never grew up with video games. I grew up watching my father play like the original Doom series, like the 8-bit like monsters coming after you have to like shoot them, and I know there's like a lot of concern. People are like, oh, it's gonna be in the back of your mind. You're gonna be violent. I'm like the most passive person. I've never been in a fight, you know, or anything. But I think the bigger concern is people aren't going out and like doing exercise. If they're playing too much games, and like it's not natural for the human body to sit down for like 6 hours playing like a World of Warcraft or like an MMORPG. And I think that's why maybe you see a little more aggression. That's a theory. I'm not basing this on like any factual information, but I think that I've noticed like if I'm sitting down for a really long time, I'm not getting any exercise, I get like antsy, I get more irritable, you know. So that's
You make a good point, and I'll even use myself as an example. When I was your age and I was going through college, we didn't have video games, but we had to get out and do things. And when I became a TV reporter, going all over the country, learning different communities, I stayed in great shape. I looked like you. Now I sit behind a desk and I don't do that very much, and I look like me. So I think the point is, you might want to do more than just play these games. But George, you've done more about these, the combination of video versus board. What else do you want to share? No, just off the top.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it is important to get face-to-face interaction. That's why I like board games, because even when I played Minecraft, I would like to sit in the same room as the person. Because even though you could do without it, I just like the face-to-face interaction.
But how can you afford video games these days? I look at the price tags and I'm thinking, my goodness.
Yeah, I don't know.
You go out on a date and have a lot more fun with that money.
That's why the SJC Game Dev Club, we make our own games. So we're an academic club that we try to teach people to, you can make your own games now with the resources and technology that's available to us. You can actually program and write your own narratives, write your own stories.
Very good.
Yeah.
And you're an illustrator, so this is right down your alley.
Oh, I've always wanted to create a video game. I have no excuse at this point. I should really join your guys' club because I've seen like the work coming out of it, and it's fantastic. I think the technology is getting so much more accessible to actually make that stuff, and it's exciting because there's these games called indie games that are coming out, and they're basically produced by like smaller groups of people. Like my cousin was playing a game where you build and manage your own city, and it was made by 11 people. I'm like, are you serious? Like, yeah, 11 people made this game, and you have programmers, you have animators, and I don't know, the industry excites me so much, like the making of the games.
That does sound exciting.
Yeah.
If they'd had it in my day, I think I would have probably been interested in that as well. What's coming next, though? And let's talk a little bit about these games. You and I were talking a little bit about these war games, these video games.
Yeah.
There's so many of them now, and they're teaching people about guns and violence and war and all that.
At the same time, the board games are getting more adult themes, like zombie apocalypse or Card Against Humanity, which is just a very inappropriate game.
A messed up version of it.
Yeah, so like I think that might be attracting more millennials too.
I think what you're trying to say is there a sense of this diversity that's happening, or that is going on? And I think so, yes. In the indie direction, in the indie game development direction, yes. Right now with the whole issues of Gamergate and the atmosphere of the gaming industry right now, there have been talks about diversity, but we are getting there. I believe.
Do you see it as a big business, though, that's trying to take advantage of millennials and want to make money? Because let's face it, that's what a lot of businesses do.
Well, millennials nowadays are not even, we're not even getting married, we're delaying buying houses and cars. We are a target market. I'm sorry, maybe some of our parents think that we're not, doing we're not living the life, but I think this is living the life, so.
Like, I don't think big business is trying to take advantage of people with video games, because nowadays you have to know how to make, we're not dumb. We have to know how to make a game for us to want to play. I think an example of this is when E.T. was made, like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which is known as the worst game ever made. It's kind of when video games were still kind of at their birth. It was kind of like this 8-bit, stupid-looking E.T. that wandered around, and it was the worst game that was ever made. And it was made by I don't know the names, but this business guy who's all like, oh, this movie's coming out. You guys need to make a game about this so everyone will buy it. So they did that, and it ended up being a huge flop. And apparently, there's cartridges of the ET game buried out somewhere in a desert, like a graveyard of ET games, And so that's kind of an example, big businesses like that, I don't think can really take advantage on that.
Well, that is still happening today.
Well, with the Call of Duty series, they're making the game
because board games,
they're milking that
they're
way
milking
too
it,
much.
Yeah.
They're milking it too much?
Yeah, because there's been 5 of them already, and it's enough.
They're the same thing.
Yeah,
I remember
it's the same
one
every time.
change in one game was my brother bought the new one, which was $60, and he bought it. He's like, oh my God, Call of Duty, 7 billion or whatever. I don't know. And then he bought it, and the only thing you could do is you could kind of change there was 2 sights on it, and you could switch it. That was it.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was the same game.
I think it's great the public's getting to see your excitement because it means something to you. It's valuable. So we can't just dismiss it that you're addicted to video games, right?
No. Because I'm not addicted to video games. I still have my priorities in life. I'm a college student. I go to class still. I don't just stay at home and play games all day. I'm responsible enough to set aside time to have recreational activity. I'll play a video game or something. But in terms of businesses taking advantage of millennials in that way, I feel as millennials we still have control of what we can consume. Because I'm not gonna go out and buy a game just because there's a commercial about it. It looks so awesome. But I'm gonna do my research on it. And millennials are good at doing research on things because we have Google now.
So be advised, Silicon Valley. They are studying what they're going to buy. But once you've done that, once you've studied what you want to buy, how about leading the industry, giving them ideas on what you really want, what you need next?
And that's what the industry, the indie development industry, the Game Dev Club, as well as all these smaller groups that are making games are trying to do. Because we know that there needs to be this sense of diversity in games. And we're seeing that nowadays with examples of companies retracting their work so that they can show more diverse characters of the LGBT community, as well as people of color, of certain descents. But going back to big companies trying to attack millennials, they know what works already, especially these big AAA companies. They know what makes money, big boobied girls or guys with big machines. But the indie scene is, we're taking video games and seeing it as an art form. We want people to see it as a academia critique, as a place for creativity. So we're taking it in that direction.
But if businesses are doing what you just suggested, it sounds like they might be inadvertently reinforcing stereotypes.
Yes.
And that's a problem, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yeah, seriously, a serious problem. Violence against women in video games, violence against people of color, we see that. Even the very premise of a zombie game really kind of, if you read into it, you can see kind of images of people in urban settings, people that are houseless. If you superimpose the image of the zombie with people that are disconnected from society, it seems like there's a little bit of a strange, perverted catharsis to killing zombies. And so if you really read into it, right? But I'm not sure if all the millennials are reading into this stuff.
Well, it's going to take more decades of your lifetime to determine just what has been the impact on millennials.
It's going to take education as well.
Meaning?
Education, like what's happening here at San Jose State. We're one of the leading schools teaching game studies designs and actually bringing up the topics of diversity through art and through this collaborative work, such as in my club. We're one of those leading schools, and other schools like LSU, some like USC, even UC, our sister school down in UC Santa Cruz. They're incorporating game studies while teaching millennials like us all these new topics of diversity which wasn't present before in the 1980s and when games were coming out. So
we're not saying to the general public in the short time we have left that you're getting more and more hooked and this is an addiction, but it actually has value, purpose, excites the mind, moves you forward, gets to engage your talents and abilities. But when will it stop? Some people will probably wonder, when is it going to stop and you're going to go out there in the real world and get a job? Is there a connection there? Is there anything that will help you in the future for your job market pursuits?
For
you, for any of you.
No,
for
yes.
you, you're doing
Playing video
animation,
games?
but
Oh,
how will that help you in the workplace?
How will playing video games help me in the workplace?
Will it engage critical thinking?
Well, for me, it is definitely a thing where I'm going into the industry, so I need to know what makes a good game. If I'm going to be developing, what makes a good character? What makes compelling characters? You know, what makes compelling enemy people to fight? What makes a good story? You know, and that's really what I'm going into.
Sounds like journalism. What makes a good story? That's what we're hoping for. Yes.
What motivates people?
So for me, there's a kind of direct connection in terms of the industry I want to go into. But in terms of...
And very quickly, let's just go over here. What were you going to say?
Oh, well, I already have a few internships lined up with Sony and Ubisoft. I'm a comm major, so I can't really program or do art. But what being in the game dev club and what playing video games has taught me is this sense of motivation to work with others, this how to work with others, that intrinsic feeling of, you know, being creative, and just other life skills, other skills that I can use because I've worked with other people making games, hitting benchmarks, hitting project dates.
Being
those
part
are
of
all
something special.
Yes.
That feels good. That always feels good. All of our career paths. You all have been wonderful. I thank you for bringing this topic. You've educated the guy. I appreciate that. Very good. And thank you all for joining us. We hope you'll come back for another edition of Equal Time.